Hello, everybody, and welcome to another hour at the Golden Hour, a chance for you and I to do whatever we want and do it together. So, this is day 2 of trying this mic. I listened to the audio yesterday and I thought it was fine, like it was slightly better, but you could still hear my computer in the background. So, I think the best way to fix that is to get the microphone closer to me, because, at some point we just need to get farther away from the computer and closer to me. So today I just have it sitting on some books. It's a little crowded for me, like sitting here in my space. So I don't know that I'll leave it at that. Like I mentioned yesterday, I could get the sort of boom arm and have it when I'm talking at the beginning and kind of push it away when I'm not talking. So, excuse me. So, that's where we are currently with experimenting with the sound. So in terms of recapping Sapiens here, we're still sort of talking about, how did science flourish among the European culture. So the notes I wrote down are, I'm sort of proposing that the winning formula here was ability and you could call it desire/ambition. That that was probably the thing that set it apart. So yes, combining conquering and science. Well, I'll get to that in a second. So when you look at the desire and ambition part, I can see here where we have sort of room for the idea that desire and ambition are allowed in a capitalist worldview. They're encouraged. They're not discouraged. Your right to think about you and yourself and what you can get in a capitalist worldview. So I can see how, in this environment, how individual greed, in many cases, is able to flourish and flourish into even a collective and cultural greed when you have that the underpinning of a worldview that supports individualism, individual desire, and things like that. Again, what strikes me the most is sort of the extreme nature of what the European culture did. The extremes to which they took their curiosity and went to make scientific documentation of so many different things. He outlines that in the book. And the extreme nature of wanting to dominate. It wasn't just, kind of the next neighborhood nearby. It was everywhere and everything. I will give the novelty of the combination of science and conquering. I'll give it its due as a tactical move. Like doing those two things together, really, they each reinforce one another very, very well. So if a scientist can be supported by a military expedition, so it's the military ship that I'm going to take to go study in a different land, and in turn, the knowledge from those discoveries is something that the military can then use, again, sort of tactically, then those two things really reinforce one another. So when they're combined, they strengthen each component. So then he's about to talk about race versus culture. Those things are often intertwined. Certainly I can see how racist theories flourished for as long as they did before biology, maybe could pipe up loudly enough and say, hey, it really has nothing to do with our biology. So that's not it. So now he seems to be saying, the feeling I get from it is, are we about to get into the trap of now having culture debates? But in a sense, like, that makes sense to me, to have ideological clashes. So I don't know if he's about to say that's bad or not. That was just my first hunch when I read it. I almost said when I read it. That's what felt right in my head. Okay, let me go through what I underlined. I liked this when he was talking about, I'm going to be lazy and not even try to remember what was trying to be translated. But when it succeeded, it said, "The great door swung open, and out came a rush of ancient but lively voices. The bustle of Sumerian bazaars, the proclamations of Assyrian kings, the arguments of Babylonian bureaucrats." I loved that. The idea that once you unlock a translation, that these voices come alive and start talking to you because you can understand it. Talks about the idea the European empires believed that in order to govern effectively, they must know the languages and cultures of their subjects. Thanks to the work of people like William Jones and Henry Rawlinson, the European conquerors knew their empires very well, far better indeed than any previous conquerors, or even than the native population itself. Their superior knowledge had obvious practical advantages. Without such knowledge, it is unlikely that a ridiculously small number of Britons could have succeeded in governing, oppressing, and exploiting so many hundreds of millions of Indians for 2 centuries. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, fewer than 5,000 British officials, about 40 to 70,000 British soldiers, and perhaps another 100,000 British business people, hangers-on, wives and children, were sufficient to conquer and rule up to 300 million Indians. So again, talking about how one thing really reinforces another. Okay, and then he says, anyway, so I underlined, in truth, neither the narrative of oppression and exploitation nor that of the white man's burden, that was a poem he referenced, completely matches the facts. The European empires did so many different things on such a large scale that you can find plenty of examples to support whatever you want to say about them. You think that these empires were evil monstrosities that spread death, oppression, and injustice around the world? You could easily fill an encyclopedia with their crimes. You want to argue that they in fact improved the conditions of their subjects with new medicines, better economic conditions, and greater security? You could fill another encyclopedia with their achievements. Due to their close cooperation with science, these empires wielded so much power and changed the world to such an extent that perhaps they cannot be simply labeled as good or evil. They created the world as we know it, including the ideologies we use in order to judge them. I thought that was a fascinating observation that we can quibble sort of about evaluating their impact. It ends up as kind of a stalemate, which I appreciate that. I feel like that's intellectually honest, that we acknowledge both of those types of things exist. But then to think about too, like, it created the rules of the game almost as well, like our even sort of system of evaluating what's right and wrong here even stems from that culture. So then he sort of mentions the idea of culturalism, perhaps replacing the place of racism and imperial ideology has now been replaced by culturalism. And he says, there's no such word, but it's about time we coined it. And he says such culturalist arguments are fed by scientific studies in the humanities and social sciences that highlight the so-called clash of civilizations and the fundamental differences between different cultures. So again, I feel like he wants to push back against the idea of making culturalist arguments. And I don't know if he's really going to revisit this idea or not. It did make me think. I sort of talked about it when he was bringing up statistics earlier. Again, it makes me wonder, are we legitimizing soft theories as hard science by using statistics and stuff? Anyway. Okay, so then he says, certainly. Oh, the cats are fighting. science. So without this contribution, it is highly questionable whether Europeans could have conquered the world. Without imperial support, it is doubtful whether modern science would have progressed very far. But then he said, behind the meteoric rise of both science and empire lurks one particularly important force: capitalism. So like I had said in my notes before I sort of got to this point in the book, that makes sense to me. That makes the most sense to me. That it's like, okay, the combination of science and empire was important, but probably what was important behind that was a worldview that would support, extreme greed. And this is the problem for me sometimes with reading books too critically. Like, I stop sometimes too early on. Well, I don't know. It's hard for me when I can sense that something's not quite there yet, that then I go, wait, but what do I really think? Or what does that mean? So it's like I struggled myself to go, wait, no, I think we're saying a handful of different things, but I'd really organize it this way. And it's like, if I had just kept reading 3 more pages, yes, that's what, he was going for too. Anyway, so I don't know. Sometimes I think I make things harder on myself than they need to be. So I'm going to start chapter 16, The Capitalist Creed. And I will reset the timer. The timer's about right, so I will just start it and wish you luck on what you're working on. I'm already nodding like crazy because this is another sort of concept I've come up against just in my own life. He said, yet to understand modern economic history, you really need to understand just a single word. The word is growth. I remember and he may not be headed in this direction with what he's about to say, but I just remember in my time working in the nonprofit sector, I just remember thinking it's never enough. Excuse me. We have to raise more money every year. Like it'll never stop. It'll, whether you're in a for-profit sector, same thing. Like next year's goal is always bigger. Always. No one ever stops to say, like, do we want to stop here? Is this good? Is this sustainable? Is this doing enough? And I feel like I feel like all I would hear for saying something like that is criticism. Well, of course you need to grow, and of course you need this, that, and the other, da da da. But man, sometimes I think that's a worthwhile question. And for those of you who might be new to these streams, I mute all the time because my children ask me questions, and I look up because they're most often talking to me from upstairs. So when I'm muted and going, that's what I'm doing. Or I'm muting at them, shouting to close your door. Okay, now I'm permanently and forever validated. Maybe, potentially. I have said for so long that banks are Ponzi schemes. And maybe I'm wrong, but he at least just said the sentence. It sounds like a giant Ponzi scheme, doesn't it? When he's talking about modern banking. The idea that, what does he say? Banks are allowed to loan $10 for every dollar they actually possess. That's 9 fake dollars. Imagined theoretical, it could work out dollars, which means that 90% of all the money in our bank accounts is not covered by actual coins and notes. If all of the account holders at Barclays Bank suddenly demand their money, Barclays will promptly collapse unless the government steps in to save it. The same is true of Lloyd's, Deutsche Bank, Citibank, and all other banks in the world. Again, he may not even be arriving at the conclusion that banks are Ponzi schemes, but I feel like I've said things like this before and it falls on deaf ears, and all people do is quote the status quo back at me, and it drives me bonkers. And I get it. Maybe it's slightly, and maybe my analogy is not right. Like maybe it functions a little differently than a Ponzi scheme, etc. But what annoys me is, I think, the emotion with which people rebut my arguments like that. They're like, no, it's different because of this. And it's like, you're making it sound like it's really different when it's really like this much different. You know what I mean? So like, I'm willing to, my cat may have just started climbing the Christmas tree. And again, how am I supposed to have such lofty thoughts when there are cats climbing Christmas trees? Okay, I digress. That was a glorious moment for me, though. Okay, he says, sounds like a giant Ponzi scheme, doesn't it? But if it's a fraud, then the entire modern economy is a fraud. I say yes. I say yes. I think that's true. I think that's true and actual. She's at it again. A fraud we're willing to accept, maybe, but a fraud nonetheless, he says. The fact is, it's not a deception. I disagree. It is a deception. But, he says, but rather, I would say, but also, it's a deception. But it's also a tribute to the amazing, he says, but rather, a tribute to the amazing abilities of the human imagination. What enables banks and the entire economy to survive and flourish is our trust in the future. This trust is the sole backing for most of the money in the world. It's true. But I mean, we made that leap, as he points out, when we decided, sure, I'll take a circle of metal instead that I can't make a weapon. I can't eat it or fight with it. We made the leap to trust before. So, yeah, I understand that that's sort of part of the game. I guess the other part of me just really needs people to understand that that's the game we're playing. And so don't talk about these things. I don't know. I have people talk about them like they're actualities because they function like actualities. They certainly are. They may be imagined, but they wield immense power. So I get all that. But still, I should stop. Okay, sorry, yes, I wasn't right back. I had got into a long discussion with my husband about the idea that banks are Ponzi schemes. Regulated Ponzi schemes. Don't take my fervor for declaring things too far. Anyway, so I am back now. Do you see? There's a tiny kitty ear down there. I can't quite get to him though, I don't think. I think if I try, he'll just run away. Okay, I see our time is up. I got almost nothing read because I was 3 pages, maybe 4, because I was too busy pontificating to my husband. But anyway, that's why I just don't know that I can take on books like this in the future. It stirs me up. It stirs me up. So good though. It's so good. It's so good. Or I should say this. That's not a knock on the book. Maybe I should say I should get better at approaching these things a different way. Anyway, I wish you a wonderful rest of your day or night and hope to see you again tomorrow. Bye-bye.